Let's talk melachos. I checked on the calendar, and while it's a little bit unpredictable what day is Yom Ha'atzmaut because of the rules they have, they don't want to put Yom Ha'atzmaut always on the 5th of of Iyar anymore, lest it be right next to Shabbos, and because of the Yom HaZikaron thing, they don't want to have uh, what is it? They don't want to have Chil Shabbos, and for that reason also, there's the Rabbanut tried to also move Lag BaOmer when Lag BaOmer is on a Motzei Shabbos, so people are going to start piling firewood already on Shabbos, towards the end, or getting where they want to go for the non-holiday. So they decided, you know what, tell everybody to do their bonfires, which doesn't make any sense. I'm a Tanakh. You can understand why they want to make a bonfire in Meron at the Kever Rashbi. Fine. But why does everybody now have to make his own bonfire? Why does every Tom, Dick, and Harry, or Shmuel, David, and Yonason have to make a fire? And not only that, why are they competing for about the size of the fire? Where I come from, I could see they're gigantic pyres piling up already all over the place. Every group of children has to have their own bonfire, which is a strange thing. But what did the Rabbanut do? So they said, do the bonfires Sunday night, towards the end of Lag BaOmer, or on Lad BaOmer. And what has that resulted in? Because a lot of people don't listen to the Rabbanut, they're still going to do their bonfires on Motzi Shabbos, and they're going to do bonfires the next night. The people who are listening, so they just basically doubled. They doubled the bonfireage. Okay, I don't know. I would have just canceled it. Chasam Sofer says if it was up to me, I would have canceled it. But I don't know. You read Shulchan Aruch also. What does the Shulchan Aruch say about Lag BaOmer?
Very little.
Well, it also there's nothing about Rashbi there. Apparently, the fact that it's his yurtzeit is a printer's error that just caught on in all places. But the Ramah still says Minhag Ashkenaz for many years was that's the day you do Ktsas Simcha, and that's the day when you finally get a haircut. So not that Lag BaOmer is unprecedented, but the whole fire thing is a little bit strange to us. We're here at the Tanan Hasmo. I see the my Gemara, but I'm not able to write on my own screen, so I'm going to put it over here. Tanan Hasmo. We're going to talk about removing the signs of tsaras. But first, it says here the line right before this: Gadol Kavod Abriot Shedoche Ethlot Ta'aseh Torah. What was that talking about? That line? God, Kavod Abrios is so important. Okay? The greatness of it that sometimes it overrides a thou shalt not of the Torah. What's the thou shalt not of the Torah? Rashi says. Uh, it says here. He says in this Rashi, lav delo tasur kihacha. The lav of don't stray from what the sages said. So is that a derisa? Yeah, you have to listen to a derisa over here. But in this particular case, this line has been misused greatly in the last generation. First of all, here Rashi saying it, sometimes the sages set aside the obligation for us to listen to them, but really, it's a legislated exception. Just like the sages say, listen to us, and we're giving rules. Sometimes we also legislate exceptions. The biggest example we have is, oh, hold on, let me let everybody in. The most important example we have is, well, Shofer, that's Shev al Taseh. Shev al Taseh, of course, we have many examples of. I was thinking more about a positive rule that allows you to get around all the other rules, like Prose Bowl, for example. If you assume, like the Rambam says, that Shmita in the last few years has been an entirely rabbinic enactment, then you could have a Prose Bowl which overrides one of the major prohibitions. If Shemitah was Doraisa, you'd have to remit all your loans at the end of the Shemitah year. There's no way around it. But once the Shemitah is itself a Derabanan, it's an enactment, what could you do? The sages can legislate that there's an exception to the remission of loans, which is if one submits his loans to the care of the Beis Din, so now those loans will not be remitted. The sages ordained the Shemitah, that is the 7th-year sabbatical, so they can also legislate an exception. That's what they could do. They're the ones who are making the rules, so they can make the rules. That's the case we have here. So first of all, it's not that Kavod HaBrioth actually overrides any particular prohibition that's explicit in the Torah, which it does not. And furthermore, you can't just pick and choose. Even if it was that Kavod HaBrioth, whatever that means, does override certain prohibitions. It depends which prohibitions, the ones that the sages created. So it's basically the sages are telling us sometimes you don't have to take us too seriously should know when not to listen to us. But it doesn't mean that there's any mitzvah d'oraisa they could override. Also, kavod habriyot is greatly misunderstood. I think Rav Jachter wrote about this, Rabbi Frimmer, and others have mentioned that the problem with kavod habriyot is it's not what they say it is. What they say it is. Well, what happened? There was a case, for example, where they said they wanted to have some sort of feminist goings on in the synagogue, give ladies an aliyah to the Torah in the synagogue, for example. Now, they said it's against kavod hatzibur. But then they said, yeah, but it's against the kavod habriyot, their own personal dignity of these women to be able to get the privilege. So the rabbis responded and said, not kavod habriyot isn't exactly what you say it is. It's not anything that you find offensive or maybe you feel embarrassed or slighted by this. So that's a kavod habriyot issue. So now we're going to put it aside because it says here, kavod habriyot puts everything aside. No, that's not how it works. But more importantly, we have to understand what the word kavod means. What does kavod? Give me a translation of that word. Kavod is the construct form of kavod. And you look in kavod, you find that it's actually a spectrum of meanings, at least in English. Most basically, what is kavod habriyot? It doesn't mean a person's honor. It means basic human dignity. Basic human dignity means that people should not be subjected to severe embarrassment or having no clothing or things like that. You know, basic human dignity. A person's right, I guess, we don't like using the terminology of rights, but a person's right to be clothed, a person's right not to be humiliated. That's all it's talking about. A person's right to have food, right to privacy, basically. That's kavod habriyot. So, like I said, human dignity, most basic human dignity. Who doesn't get human dignity? Animals. But every person who's Tzelem Elokim is entitled to human dignity. And on the far end of the spectrum of this translation of the word kavod, we have God's glory, which fills the entire world. The Maloch Ars Kavodo, and God's glory is refers to a phenomenon that sometimes people could even sometimes see. It says that when the tabernacle was first constructed and dedicated, and same thing with the temple, God's kavod appeared in a gigantic cloud that was so awesome the Kohanim couldn't even enter the place. It was something that was palpable. That's God's glory. And then you have the kavod of certain people in the hierarchy of, I guess, godliness. God has certain representatives in this world. So his messianic king, or any king who is anointed, is basically the highest ranked person in that, I guess, hierarchy there. So he's entitled to kavod malchut. And the Kohen Gadol is also one of God's chosen ones and also technically an anointed person. So he ranks a little bit lower than the king. So they have a certain form of majesty and honor and reverence that's given to them. And then, of course, we are all supposed to honor those who represent the Torah. Torah scholars, those who have actually amassed much Torah wisdom and are righteous, so they are entitled to a certain degree of honor also. Sometimes level on par with that of the king. So the king has to stand up for the high priest at some points, but the high priest is supposed to have him sit down, and they're all supposed to stand up for a Sefer Torah or for the greatest scholar. But then again, there's also things in which they outrank the scholar, and all of us have an obligation to revere and honor our parents. In that case, also it's honor. So you understand that this kavod, depending on how far we go, how up or down on the scale we go, it has different translations. So kavod habriyot isn't just about someone's honor slighting. If you're a regular person, it's just your basic dignity. So you're not going to embarrass you in the synagogue. Look, kavod habriyot doesn't mean what they say it means. Okay, let's now that we clarified that, we can see this next malacha. There's a bryce over here, Tanan Hatham, Hatolej Simonei Tuma, Va'koveh Hamichya. What's a person having? This is 94b. This line, you can start counting lines, but for those who are seen on the screen, it's here. I'll point over here. It's across from the middle of the Tosfos that says Aval, and across from almost where Rashi starts the Mishnah, where I put a little star over here, my Gemara. What's the case over here? Someone pulls out Simonei Tuma. The Simonei Tuma is referring to the hairs in the Baheret. Nowadays, we don't have Kohanim who do this, but technically speaking, they could. If a person develops certain lesions on his skin, certain marks or bald spots, wherever it is on his head, there are different forms of nigaim. Saras, obviously, is not a particular disease. It's actually caused by many diseases. Changes in skin color, loss of hair, growth of hair in certain places. In this case, the Simonei Tumah tum'ah are the two unusual hairs that are in the middle of the nega. Whereas Rashi here says, "Simani tumah shtei saroth levanoth sheha bahereth mitama abahen." If a person has a bahereth, which means bahereth from the word bahir, means a clarity of skin like the white spot, and he has these two hairs that have sprung up in the middle of them, that's the sign, oh, he's tameh. It doesn't mean he's necessarily tameh. No, like we said before, it has to be diagnosed by the Kohen. The Kohen has to see it and say, yeah, you're tameh, sorry, now you're officially a mitzora. But if for some reason those hairs will go away, they'll fall out, so the tuma would go with them. If he's already been declared to be tameh, so he'll have to undergo the usual purification ritual. If he has yet to been declared, if the Kohen had yet to declare him tameh, so in this case he's got himself a free pass. So we should actually tell people to do this. If you think you've already been through the week of quarantine because the Kohen warned you, perhaps this Baharis is developing into a real full-blown saras. So if the hairs spring up, make sure to shave them off or pull them out or something before I can declare that it's saras. No, that's still prohibition. You're not allowed to do so. Rambam and others bring he shamer benegat saras, like Rashi says. He shamer benegat saras means you're not allowed to destroy the sign of tsaras. Or in this case, they also brought koeh ha-mechya. A person has recuperated skin in the middle of this other type of lesion. So what will he do? He'll actually burn himself. If the skin is supposed to look nice, there's an area inside the lesion which is actually kind of healed, and his bus are high, so it looks good. So what's he going to do? He'll take a branding iron or something, or just his clothing iron, and burn himself. So if a person has the ability to actually do that to himself, but he'll basically get rid of the mark that is making him tameh. So yes, he's hurting himself, but also he's helping himself avoid the Kohen declaring it. This reminds me of people trying to get out of the Tsarist army by what? By hurting themselves. I gave the story about that. Vladek Spiegelman's father removing his own teeth so that he would not be drafted by the army. Yeah, well, that was before the Polish independence, but in the interwar period, the Polish army wasn't as bad as, let's say, the Tsarist, Russian army. But either way, that's what he did to himself in order to, as a from Jew, to not suffer that form of shmad. So the Mishnah is talking about a person who does this, over below taseh. So yes, he's saved himself from tuma, but he's also done an avera by doing so. Itamar. So what do they say about this? Achat mishtayim chayav. If there were but two hairs there, and this person pulled out only one of them, okay, two hairs, now one, so he's liable for transgressing this prohibition. What about achat mishalosh? There were three hairs. So in order to save himself, he'd have to take out at least two of them. Taking out one of the three, doesn't have any practical effect yet. Maybe if we'll take out another one afterwards, then it'll have an effect. So what is there's a person, even though lechatchila he should not do so, we say after the fact, over below ta'aseh means, has he violated this? We're asking a question. Does he violate anything? Rav Nachman Amar chayav, yes. For just taking out one of three, he is held in violation of this prohibition. Why does it matter? When the sages tell you, they're not using the terms asur and mutar, like in Shabbos. Asur means before the fact. Mutar means before the fact. Chayav means after the fact. Now that he's done it, will he suffer the penalty? Usually when the Gemara says chayav, it's referring to at least the chatos, for being shogeg of violating Shabbos. Here, it's chayav, malchus. Okay? So should the beis din lash him if another fellow had told him, hey, don't destroy your sign of tsaras on your skin. Okay? Edim and hasra and all that. Rav Sheshes says, but patur, for taking out one of three hairs, he would be exempt from any punishment. Although, of course, l'chatchila, he should not have done so. Was the question? No? Okay. So Rav Nachman is going to explain his position. Rav Nachman Amar Chayav. Why does Rav Nachman say he's still liable for removing one out of three hairs? Ahani ma'asav. His action is effective. De'i mishtakla chada aharithi azulo tuma. Why? Because he's halfway there. If he were now to remove yet another hair, he will also get rid of the impurity. Okay, so he's halfway there. Well, what's the question?
So we were bothered by the idea of getting Malchus to something that has not yet happened in a sense.
Well,
He hasn't affected any tumor. The guy is still a possibility of being tormented.
yeah.
So pulling out one hair
It's done nothing.
has not really done anything. The possibility still is not.
Well, from the drasha, Hishamer b'negat tzaras l'shmor ma'od. How does it necessarily include in that pasuk? I'm going to defend Rabbi Nachman here. Does it matter that his action has had an effect on the tuma? He's Hishamer b'negat tzaras. He's not supposed to touch the nega. Period. Harming the nega is the problem, not necessarily did it have an effect in rescuing him from his impurity. That's not the standard Rav Nachman has.
So we're talking about the act and not the totzah.
Yeah, and that's why, for example, we said taking out one of two hairs, everybody agrees chayil. Right? Taking out one of two hairs, but he'll have to take out, hani masav. You have to, maybe some don't look at, whether or not the tumah has been removed or not. Soon we're going to see the case, right? In order to violate Shabbos, the din of ha'avara, going from, let's say, Rosh Hashanah, you have to carry something, right? Just walking with yourself, you're not carrying. You're wearing your clothing, that's fine. But you have to carry something that has hishtamshus. So they said with food substances, a kazayas, and also with tuma, something that can transpose tuma. Yes, so there the sages said there's a shiur that is mo'il, some sort of utility to it. But here, I don't know, maybe there are sages who felt that this prohibition of kishamer b'negat tzaras, the standard is not utility. There might not even be a standard, just do anything. Yeah.
Don't care whether it affects the tumor or doesn't affect the tumor.
Not only that, perhaps even, let's say a person were to try to do something to heal himself. And he knows that this tzaras is caused by, I don't know, some sort of vitamin deficiency. Or he can easily get some sort of lotion and apply it twice a day, some antifungal, and the tzaras will go away. Can he do such a thing to help himself? So the sages said they don't want things that are destructive, like burning himself. They talk about pulling out hairs and burning himself so that he gets himself a burn instead of this other thing. But perhaps maybe it would be within reason that he can take natural treatments in order to get rid of its tzaras. This Mitzorah who's living outside of town now for a week, since the Kohen declared himself Tameh, why can't he go to a mineral spring and, or the Dead Sea, apply some sort of mud, do something, sit in the sun all day, maybe some sunlight will heal it. Why can't he get himself healed? So I think the question is a little bit open. Perhaps there is what he can do to help himself. Okay, so that's Rav Nachman's argument, the Machmir argument. And Rav Shesha says, this is the way the halacha holds, Amar Patur. He says he's exempt for taking out 1 out of 3 hairs. For the person who burned himself on purpose, there's no standard because, touches to burn, you just burn it. There's no quantification here. Hashda mihat ha'ita l'tuma. Because still, even though he pulled out 1 hair, the tumah is still there because he has sachakol 2 hairs there. So Rav Shesha is going to bring precedent for this patur. Let's see if there's Rashi that we should say. Here. No, let's go on the Gemara. Amar Rav Shesha mina aminullah. How do I know this? So let's compare it to a different case. It's not. Mechein kazayas min ha-mace. It's talking about a person who's carrying a kazayas from a dead person. Why would you have such a thing, a kazayas of a mace? So I was trying to come up with an example that's not ghoulish, that a person is, for whatever reason done this, but this happens actually. There's a person who died suddenly. He was generally healthy. He died of trauma to his head, but all the organs inside are fresh and healthy. So this person has an organ donor card. They're going to, shortly after his passing, they're going to donate his kidneys and everything to all sorts of people who are waiting for such thing. He's going to rescue 7 people's lives. So the organs taken out of a mace are certainly larger than the kazayas, and at least some of them. The retina is not. So I guess he's doing some sort of eye transplant, that'll work. But all the things they take out of him, including, let's say, a kidney, there are many kazesim there. So that kidney has 2 mas mace to it. So a person obviously has a heter, even as a kohen, to help someone else's life, so he would be matam himself. But in essence, this is still kazayas from the mace, and it transfers tuma. I tried to ask Rabbi Brody. I didn't get a question back. I sent him a Shilo. He's the organ donor guy. His organization. There used to be Halachic Organ Donor Society, and they joined with another one. Now they call themselves Tikva. Rabbi Shlomo Brody, who lives out in Modi'in. So yeah, you didn't answer my question yet today. I know you checked it. At what point do they say that the kidney no longer transfers tuma? The second it's attached to the recipient, doesn't have to take. Do they have to close up the wound? What is it? When is it considered no longer tame?
The story talked about that, and they said that it's never tame because mace the tame and kind of tame.
No, it's talking about a mace. They took a kidney out of a dead person.
Save it, but since it's going to be in a state about replanted and going to be a thigh, it never really has a thing of tumor.
I find that
that's written in the
yeah, but it was a mace.
That's why you're permitted to transplant into a Kohen. It's not the Kohen.
And I still said even if the Kohen were in a life and death situation, then we're allowed to contaminate him. We don't need that heter that it's going to be not contaminating. I'm sorry, but I cannot accept what you were saying.
Okay. So the source that they bring is from Elisha Elisha was a Kohen, Eliyahu was a Kohen, one of them was a Kohen.
That's also not so clear. But
when the question is, how could he have saved the son of the Shunammite woman be stoned? So the answer the Gemara brings is mace Natame and Kai Natame.
Okay, so they
learn from play around with it.
Okay, so I would address that there's a lot of holes in that, I think. But either way, I was under the assumption that if you have a person who was pronounced dead, and now they're going to harvest organs, those organs do have tumas mace. After all, it's not so clear that all of them will end up in a person. So my only question my assumption was, at what point do we say that the kidney is now living and no longer transposing? The only reason I brought this up was trying to find an example of a person who's walking around with the kazayas of a dead person. Okay, that's not a normal thing that you'd have a kazayas min hames. I hope, right? Usually, then we keep them whole. We don't do that type of thing. And also a nevela. Nevela has a different type of tuma to it. A nevela means an animal that died without shchita. Doesn't matter if it's treifa or not. Shchita was not performed on this animal, so its meat is contaminated. Not as bad as a human mace. The tumas nevela, a person could get rid of that just by going in a mikvah. Tumas mace is a much more elaborate, longer ritual. So if he's carrying something around like this on Shabbos, he's chayav. Why? Because he's crossed the threshold of usefulness. Of what usefulness is a piece of mace or nevela? Well, not good useful, but it does contaminate. If it was less than a kazayis, it would not contaminate someone. Right? That's the threshold. Oh, chatzizai is putter. So if a person were to be, the inference the Gemara makes, or Rav Sheshis makes, is that if a person were carrying half a kazayis of mace or nevela, so he would be putter on Shabbos for, let's say, walking around in Rosh Hashanah. Yet, Tanya, there's a brisa that says chatzi zayis chayav. If a person were even carrying around the chatzi zayis, he'd be chayav. So they're going to have to answer this. Chatzi zayis chayav. So how little? If it's the chiyuv is even for chatzi zayis, which does not transfer tuma, what about a quarter of a zayis, a mashahu? Good question. My love. So it must be ha de Tanya chayav. If it says he's chayav for this less than a normal shiur, what's it talking about? The apik chatzi zayis mikazayis. It's because he's actually he started off with the kazayis, he cut it in half, and now he's working around the other half. That this other half being removed from the first half has what basically made it that this now no tuma can be transferred because you don't have a kazayis of the impurity of the avatuma there or the aviavos tuma. If it's a mace, you don't have it in one shot. The hadatan patur, and when it says patur for carrying around, or it implied that carrying around less than the zayis, he's patur. The apik chatzi zayis mikazayis umechza means that this half of the zayis came from a quantity that had 1.5 zayis, for example. So removing half a zayis means that this full zayis still has its capacity to impart impurity, and therefore is within the threshold of if a person were to carry it around on Shabbos, he would be violating Shabbos. That's Rav Nachman's. That's Rav Sheshis' inference. So what's the analogy back to the simani tuma? Having chetzi zayis mitoch zayis is a ratio of 1 from 2, like pulling out 1 out of 2 hairs. Chiyuv. And having chetzi zayis from 1.5, that's a ratio of 1 from 3. Removing 1 from 3 is a pure in this case. It doesn't really affect anything. So that's sort of the comparison. It's not a complete comparison, but it's good enough for Rav Sheshes. And Rav Nachman responded, Idi v'idi chayav. No, it doesn't matter what he takes out. If you start off with a kazayas or 1.5 kazasim, and now he takes out a half from that, he would still be obligated on Shabbos. The hadid not patur, when it says there's a patur for walking around with this half kazayas, the optic chatzi zayas mi meis gadol. It means he took out a half kazayas from a full size corpse. Yeah. Yeah, he affected nothing. It's just a kazayas. And like I said, this example is like, for example, a cornea transplant. Anybody know about cornea transplants? So usually it's a mace who donates the cornea. A cornea is a thin piece of something in the eye, certainly less than a kazayas, even according to the most makel opinions. So that's where you'd have this. They take the cornea from the mace, and that does not transfer tuma, and that's the case where Nachman's talking about that. So halachically speaking, we did touch upon some halachas here. I wanted to bring what the Rambam says in Hilchos Shabbos Yud Ches Yud Ches. It's kind of interesting. So that's the simon, like Rav Turiel would say, Chai Chai. Right? It means life, life. But he's talking about the types of tuma that is from a mace. And by the way, tumas tzaras is similar to tumas mace. In what extent? Well, Chazal say first of all, mitzvah is like a mace. That's the first thing. Secondly, the mitzvah's purification ritual is actually technically more severe than that of the one who has tumas mace. Why? One who touched a dead person. So it takes him 7 days to purify. What does he do? Day 1, today I touched the mace, so I'm counting day 1. Day 2, on day 3, he gets sprinkled with a little paraduma ashes. How much does it take? A simple 1 drop. Same thing on day 7, and he goes to the mikvah and he's fine. Whereas the mitzorah is impure for 7 days, and he can only start his count to purify himself once he goes to the kohen, and the kohen says, you are healed, and now he can start the count. And he has to bring korbanos in order to do it, and his sprinkling is a lot more elaborate. It starts with the bird and everything, and the kohen has to put the oil on his earlobes and on his thumb and on his big toe, right? And there's also a shaving process. It's a lot harder to remove tumas tzaras, which is also a 7-day thing. And so they consider him a mace. Rambam says, let's say for whatever reason, a person's carrying around on Shabbos. He has from a dead person or an avela or a sheretz. All have their different forms of impurity. Kashiur tumatan, kach shurihem, shirei hutzatan. Just like the shiur, how much of whatever this is, it contaminates, so too that's the shiur for carrying around on Shabbos, the threshold of punishment. So with regards to a dead person or a nevela, a dead animal, it's a kazayas worth. That's the threshold of prohibition on Shabbos and punishment. But for a sheretz, it's ka'adasha, finding a dead lizard or rodent. So it of course, if you have the whole one, that imparts impurity. But all it takes is an adasha. An adasha is just a lentil. A lentil's worth is smaller than a kazayas. So finding a lentil worth of mouse is actually pretty bad. That also will contaminate a person. Exactly an olive. And he took out half of it. Okay, so now he's at 2/2 olives worth of this tuma. Chayav sheharei ho'il b'masav shenishma'et ha-shiur milatamei. Okay, by taking this chetzi zayis and cutting it in half, so now he's chayav for doing such a thing. Why? Because he reduced the shiur of the tuma. Okay, ho'il ma'asav. That's what he says. Yeah, yes. Aval imotzi kazayit zayit. No, kaschetzi zayit mizayit umechza patur. Okay, but if you were to take out half a zayis from this thing, but he left another, still a zayis left of the original impurity, so he doesn't do anything, so he'd be patur. It didn't affect anything, and no effect. So la halacha, we don't hold like Rav Nachman, as you could see. It's the effect is the threshold of prohibition. Now it's kind of interesting. What about adashas? Rambam could have said also the example of chatzi adasha from the sheretz. Okay, yeah, that happens. So you see that they hold basically Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes brought a good proof to what he said from another place. And that's why you'd find this in the usual codes. Okay, let's go into the Mishnah. Unless there are questions here. No? Does this come up? I found, I don't know if they have trisim here in this country, the shutters you have for your windows. So it's a strap. Basically, you pull down the strap and, the shutters come down across your windows. We didn't have it in the States. Where are the shutters located while the windows are open? There's a box above the window. Does anybody ever fix those things? Sometimes the strap snaps. Have you ever fixed it? No, good. Yourself? Good. So it's a good skill to have. I've done it maybe 50 times now. But they're always snapping. I just want to. You did it too? Good. Okay. So don't make your son-in-law do it. So you have to. I've opened up that box in our living room, the big one, double-sized door, and I found 2 dead lizards there. Right? Desiccated ones, and those, that's the type of tomb they have. We also said that's the type of thing that the Kohanim have to check the Beis Hamikdash for in the morning. The Kohanim open up the Beis Hamikdash before sunrise. They do Belisha. They inspect the Azara for Tuma. What? There's going to be Tuma in the Azara? Yes. It could be some sort of a cat brought in a lizard or a mouse or something and left it dead, or just a lizard died there, and they have a certain type of Tuma to them. That's not the kind of thing you want the Azara, but it could have happened. Just like Chazal, like we said last time, they're worried about birds landing on the roof of the Beis Hamikdash, so they put spikes and sharp metal plates to keep the birds off of there. It is there is nature still around. Hanotel tzipornav zo bezo. A person is able to take off his fingernails with each other. That means he uses, let's say, 2 nails on his right hand to remove the nail that's on one of the fingers of the left hand, instead of using a nail clipper or scissors. O bishinov, or he uses his teeth, like we used to do as kids. You bite off a piece of your nail, and that's how, nail clipping for Erev Shabbos. V'chein sa'aro v'chein sfamo, or he takes out some of his own hair, or from his mustache. V'chein zekano, or from his beard. Doing any of these things by hand. V'chein hagodelet, v'chein hakohelet, v'chein hapokesef. Women who, now we're talking about women, what are they doing? What's Godeleth, Pokeseth, and Kochelet? So Rashi says, although there is some room for argument here, Godeleth means, well, she's doing it with her hair. She's braiding her hair, generally speaking. And he says, Kochelet means putting eyeshadow on. That's where the modern Hebrew word blue comes from, because generally speaking, eyeshadow was blue since Egyptian times. Hey, no one wants red eyeshadow. They tried it. If you put on black or red, it would look, it doesn't have the same effect. And also the pokesef. What does Rashi say? He actually doesn't know. He's not certain what it's referring to, but it has to do with some sort of makeup, and that's why it's in the feminine. Rashi says, Yesh be rabotai omrim mitakenet sarah b'masreik o b'yadayim. She's somehow fixing her hair with a comb or with her hands. V'yeshim mefarshim tacha kamin batzeik al panha uchshenot lo ma'adim basar. Or she's putting some sort of cakey stuff on her face, and when she takes it off, it makes her red. Okay, a form of rouge. Nowadays, you think that a woman, if she wanted to redden her cheeks, she just applies a type of makeup, which is called rouge from the French, meaning red. Yes. So I guess, if you want to sound fancy, you don't just say it in English, you say it in French, and then it's suddenly also more romantic. But Tosfos say that Rashi, his interpretation there, Pokeseth, Tosfos says, Masha Piris Bekuntris, Pokeseth, Hainu Soreketh Bayad Oba Masrek, Ain Nira. Rashi's proposed idea that he heard from his rabbis. It has to do with combing the hair a certain way. They don't buy it. Gemara, Mashma, Davi, Kain, Twiya, Usrika. It has to do something with twisting and combing. There's twisting the hair, maybe. I don't know. So it's not like regular twisting. So it doesn't say it. But Od, and also the Mishnah could have just said combing the hair. And we can understand, by the way, combing usually sometimes results in removing the hair, so we can see why there's a malacha there. As he says, with regard to the Nazir face of Alo Sorek, a Nazir who's also not supposed to be removing his hair all week long, can move his hair aside and things like that, but he should not be combing his hair because that will result in the removal of hair. So the Tosfos, I guess they're implicitly endorsing Rashi's second proposal that Pokeseth means applying a rouge. So the cheeks should look redder, but above the eyes it should look blue. And those are all things that are apparently prohibited. We didn't say prohibited yet. We just gave it a list of examples. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev. So Rabbi Eliezer would say chayev, which means that these are full-blown malachas on Shabbos. Whereas the sages say the chachamim osrim mishum shivot. The sages say it's just a prohibition on Shabbos of the sages, lest one come to do the actual malacha, or because it's too similar to a malacha, but not the actual malacha. And I say shavot because that's the correct pronunciation. There's a cholam there. Why do we say shavus in yeshivish? Because it's easier to. First of all, if it was a shiruk, it would be shavut, a long U sound. But we say it with a short U sound, as though it's English or Yiddish. Yeah, it's easier for us to say put. We don't say put, right? We say, for certain words, we say good. We don't say good. We do say food, but it's easier for us to say good, right? It's a shorter vowel. So because in Yiddish, people tend to shorten the vowels, especially unaccented syllables. So it became shavus. But the problem is the Hebrew word shin vav, shin vet vav taf with a shavuth and with a shiruk or shavit means captivity. And that's the way it is throughout Tanakh. And sometimes it means those who return from captivity. It's sort of play on words. The shoresh shin vav vet means to return. The shoresh shin bet hey, silent hey, means to go captive or take captive. And so usually the captives get returned. A lot of biblical prophecies, we have Shuva Hashem eth shivithenu. Okay? God return with our captives. And a lot of times, shivithenu is spelled shivuthenu. And a lot of times, shivuthenu is spelled shivithenu. It's a Greek sieve, and there's no rule in Tanakh, is it spelled with a yud or with a vav, or is it pronounced with a yud or with a vav? But the point is, if it is with a vav, it's pronounced with a shiruk. However, with a cholam, the shoresh is shin bet taf, and it's from the infinitive lishboth, meaning to desist on Shabbos. In a word like Shabbos, the taf is part of the shoresh. So with a cholam, it's talking about desist. It's the imperative form of the verb to desist. It means desist, shavot. So that's what the sages were telling us. And I'm surprised because this fact is known to grammarians and the people who are supposed to put the dots in the Gemaras or in the Gemara and the Rambams and the Sidurim. But for some reason, in modern printings of the Rambam, half the time they get it wrong. I'm referring to, let's say, the Koran and the Makbili versions, where some chapters it's written properly, Shavot. But in other times they wrote Shavut. And you have to ask them, what captivity? This is talking about a Gzeira on Shabbos of the sages. Okay, so whatever. Maybe in the upcoming edition they'll correct it. Hopefully, the problem is that's what happens. You have time to do a second edition, so you could correct the typos, but then new ones creep in somehow. The computer just creates them sometimes randomly. Let's see what the Gemara says here. Which Tana is this? Is it Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Elazar? No. So I was not quite sure, so we'll see soon. Maybe there'll be a clue. Okay? I'm thinking it's Rabbi Elazar. Let's work with that. Right? Yeah, so in this case, we're just making sure. Because now we're in the Gemara.
Gemara's in the Gemara.
Yeah, so in the Gemara is Rav Elazar, Rav Eliezer. Usually Rabbi Elazar. Okay? So let's see. The problem is it doesn't say in my Gemara, but maybe you have one that has no Rashi Tevos.
I have a losa.
Okay, good. That's what I was thinking. Machlokas bayad. When the Mishnah is talking about this, it mentions Tzipor of Zobazo, saying, yeah, the Machlokas, Rabbi Eliezer and the sages is talking about by hand. Rabbi Eliezer would obligate for violating Shabbos, and the sages say rabbinic prohibition. A person who violates Shabbos rabbinically, is he to bring a chatas, or is he lashed for doing so, or put to death for doing so? No. He is given makas mardus, but if he did it b'shogeg, he has no korban to bring. That would be the nafkamina. Did it b'shogeg. So he says, bayad, aval bichli chayav. If he were to have used some sort of tool to do so, the general tools that people use to remove fingernails or hair are usually scissors or clippers of some sort. Okay? Typical tool that is used. Nami pat. Hold on a second. Chayav. The sages would agree that if a person were to use a kli to remove some of his mustache hair or any hair on his head or tweeze it out, or whatever else the Mishnah says, these examples of a person uses a kli or the woman uses some sort of instrument to apply her eyeshadow or her rouge or to what is here, braid her hair, and there are tools they use for braiding hair. It's not just something you do by hand, apparently. So that would be a chiyuv on Shabbos. So the Gemara asks, Pshita, shouldn't this be clear? Like that's what the Mishnah said. Zo bezo, it's not. It wasn't talking about someone who's using a tool to remove the hair or whatever it may be. It was talking about doing it by hand. It said zo bezo, using his own fingernails to remove another fingernail, or using his teeth. That's what it says, zo bezo, it's not. And the answer they give to explain Rabbi Elazar's offering what seems to be obvious information is, Mahu dethema, what would you have said? Rabbanon bichli nami patri. Perhaps the sages even exempt the person who does these actions on Shabbos, but uses a kli. Really, they would also give an exception. The fact that Mishnah says that he's using his fingernails themselves to remove his fingernails, lo diacha kochodu Rabbi Eliezer. They're trying to bring out that Rabbi Eliezer is machmir, even in this case where a person didn't even use a kli to remove something from his body on Shabbos. What's the malacha generally speaking? Says a tolesh. Well, the av malacha for building the Mishkan was removing wool or hair from goats and sheep, right? That was the av malacha they used to make the Mishkan. They didn't use any human hair to create the Mishkan. The av malacha is shearing the sheep or taking the hair from the goats that they use, and also eventually the goats have to give up their skin also to make the cover of the Mishkan. But they say the tolda thereof is cutting human hair. Removing human hair or human fingernails is a tolda, but not the av malacha. Kamash Malon, so that's what the Mishnah is teaching. But we wouldn't have held that way like Rabbi Elazar either. Rabbi Elazar is basically saying here, in defense of himself, that you could have thought that the sages would exempt a person from a biblical prohibition or biblical obligation on Shabbos if he were to have, let's say, removed a few of his hairs with a kli on Shabbos. That was his havamina. Okay, yeah. It's an interesting havamina. V'amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar also said, what?
There's no the connection. You could argue, as Rashi says.
Yeah.
That
Human hair.
Animal, Abdullah is talking about animals.
Yeah.
Why do you necessarily apply to human beings?
Yeah. So I wrote here a thing here. The havamina is because wool is useful, but not human hair. Okay, wool is useful to making things. Why would people? Why is the av malacha, the real malacha, cutting off wool from a sheep? Because we use wool for all sorts of things. Wool is actually quite useful. It's amazing. Can you imagine how difficult life would have been for the modern era? They used it every day. All your main clothing was made out of wool. Human clothing for ages has been made out of wool. So, but not a few human hairs. Taking off a few human hairs, there's no use that we have really for human hairs. However, things have changed actually. Now it would be an av malacha. Why? Because taking off human hairs, why would people shear a human? Okay, let's say there's a young human female has very long and nice hair. Why would it be a malacha now to shear her, even according to Rabbi Elazar? Because you could use it to make a wig. Okay, it has a use. In the olden days, they didn't have the technology when they talk about pe'ah in the Mishnah, Misha and the pe'ah, so that became our modern Hebrew word for sheitel. They didn't have the way to make it look actually convincing in any way in the olden days. That's why those who are anti-wig today, which there are many poskim, said when the sages talk about that a woman has a pe'ah a little bit of a wig, it means that she was wearing her head covering, whatever it was, or hijab as they had it, and to have something showing a little bit, everybody knew that was fake hair, but it wasn't something that could actually wear that would look convincing in any way. But nowadays, the technology has gotten much better, so it's kind of weird if a woman wants to be modest by covering her hair that she just uses something that looks even fancier than her regular hair. Okay, so it's a little bit strange. So Rabbi Elazar says here, machlokes la'atmo, the machlokes of the Mishnah, in which we have the Rabbi Elazar as being machmir, and the sages are lenient. That's talking about if a person does this to himself. If a person were to try to use his own fingers to tweeze out someone else's hair, or one woman is applying eyeshadow to the other woman, so that would be a patur even for Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah. Really? Nowadays there are women who are professional. It used to be, I guess, they didn't have what we call a malparrot, professional makeup artists. You know that nowadays women pay good money to get their makeup professionally done, especially before things like weddings where they hire their own personal makeup person for the the closest for the bride and for her closest relatives, right? I never understood it. It makes no sense, but whatever. Okay. I'm actually kind of uncomfortable with all sorts of face paint. It doesn't really matter which kind and when. So it says here that would have been grounds for leniency. Pshita, okay. And we also say this should be obvious. It says "si pornov tanan." Person's taking off his own fingernails. It doesn't say clipping his friend's si por, si pornei chavero or something like that. So they're explaining Rabbi Elazar. Ma'od desema. What would you have said? What?
We find like shaving.
Yeah.
One shave the other person. Both of them are probably. And they come from market.
Yeah.
Which would be, so why shouldn't it be different over here?
That's a very good question. And I would like to offer an answer to that. When we're talking about on Shabbos, we're talking about utility. We're talking about meleches machsheves. So generally speaking, the lagufa of the malacha, like we said with the sheep, you're not giving the sheep a haircut. You are obtaining useful wool. And that's why there's even a havamina. Taking out 2 hairs from a man's head or from his mustache is not a real malacha because there is no use for a single hair from a guy's mustache or a human's fingernails. Clipping your fingernails does not result in a real useful malacha of any sort because we have no use for the fingernails, right? It's like digging a hole. Are you digging a hole in order to make a hole or because you want the dirt? So, 2, what you have here is with the nikaf and the makif, there, when it talks about the prohibition of cutting off one's payas, the payas of the head, or shaving the face, the prohibition is not we're trying to get the hair. We're not looking at meleches machsheves. We're looking at an entirely different prohibition, which is a person should not have that type of goyish haircut or that type of goyish face, as Rishonim say. The whole point of the Isser Pas Arosh, Lo Takif, is saying you shouldn't make it that it looks like your hair on top of your head ends right here at the ear so that there's nothing over here. That's the standard of prohibition. So the standards of prohibition for these 2 Isurim are entirely different. And that's why even in Makif and even the Nikaf, they're both prohibited. You sat in front of the barber and asked him, shave the side of my head over here. It's your prohibition and his prohibition. But for Shabbos, we're looking at the usefulness, the productivity of the action. In this case, they could have said there's no productivity. Does that answer the question? Yeah, okay. So let's see. What's the ma'od the tema of Rabbi Elazar? Lachavero. Nami mechayev. Okay, Rabbi Elazar might have said that, perhaps in this Mishnah, that one who did this to his fellow, he's the one who clipping his fellow's nails. Is that something you could even do? It'd actually be kind of hard to clip another man's nails. Hold still. You have to, even doing it to children is a real malacha, but you have no other choice. The child can't clip his nails, so the mother has to do it. But most men clip their own fingernails, and it's kind of strange that if you'd go ask your friend, here, use your fingernails to take off my fingernail. Doesn't really work that way. Nami mechayev. So Rabbi Elazar might have said that even that is a prohibition, a full-blown prohibition on Shabbos. V'had katani tzipornav. The fact that the Mishnah says a person taking off his own fingernails, lo diacha kuchan de rabbanon. It teaches the rabbis how makel they are. That they say a person does this to himself, still no biblical prohibition. Kamash balon. That's not what we say, but it's an interesting havamina. Let's continue. I think we still have time. How do they hold? Well, what do we say on Shabbos, generally speaking? There's actually a complicated Rambam. I forgot to bring it with me. We'll say it a little bit out loud here. If a person has a problem with his nails on Shabbos, there actually are heterim. We're going to see the tsar, right? And there's a piece of skin. It depends on which way klape mala. There's a machlukas Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. But klape mala, so both directions. This is klape mala. That's klape mala. So they say that there are ways if a person has some tsar and it's already hanging off, and it is Shabbos, and he does it without a kli. So technically speaking, he's allowed to do so. And it's not a malacha. Let's continue in the Gemara. V'chein saro Tana. Yeah, tsar from the sa'ar. Tana hanotel milo pi hazug chayav. Person who takes off, what is pi hazug? It means the scissor full. How much does a scissor cut? Well, it depends on the scissors, but we're going to say, what is the pi hazug? The zug means the scissors because they come in pairs. The idea that the scissors actually have a fulcrum over here, like our modern scissors, is actually kind of new. I think Da Vinci came up with those. In the olden days, scissors looked more like tongs. They're 2 pieces that went to the side of each other. You could actually see pictures of them. They have it in the museum. Okay, scissors used to look different, but the point is, it's two sharp metal things that go next to each other, and they cut what gets stuck in between. So he says here, "V'chamo melo pi azug." So how much is that? A scissors full. Okay? The P doesn't mean the mouth; it means the edge of the scissors. Al pi cherev, right? Like by the edge of the sword. Amar Rav Yehuda, shtayim, two hairs worth. Tanya or kacha shtayim. Wait a minute, but it says elsewhere, the continuation of this Talmudic teaching, cutting up the hair, it's one threshold, and korcha for the prohibition of making a bald spot in one's head over a dead person out of an act of mourning, it's 2 hairs. So for that lo tasimu korcha b'nei nechem l'meith prohibition, the threshold is 2 hairs, and it's implying that pi hazug, which is mentioned also, must be something else than 2 hairs. So the answer of the Gemara is ema v'chein lekorcha shtayim. No, so you should read that teaching as, and so too for the prohibition of giving yourself a bald spot right in the middle of your head over a dead person. So that's also 2 hairs. Melo pi hazug equals the shiur of balding, which is 2 hairs worth. Okay. Rabbi Lezer Omer, achas. No, just 1 hair. Melo pi hazug, 1 hair. Why did they just say 1? Good question. Umodim chachamim Rabbi Lezer bimlaket levanot mitoch shorot shafilu achat chayav. They would agree that just pulling out 1 hair, milakate, means getting rid of 1 white hair among all his black hairs. For many of us, this isn't relevant. Even if we pull out all the white hairs we have on our heads, it wouldn't really, it wouldn't be much of an improvement, or probably, maybe worse. But there were some people who did this. There are people who they pride themselves on having very dark hair well into their 60s, and they have a lot of it. So if a single white hair would make them oigavalt, that'd be the end of it. They'll start looking like their friends. So they can't have that, so they have to do that. So they acknowledge that even doing 1 of those is chayav. But that type of thing, even during the week, is prohibited. Yeah, but I think it's worse on Shabbos. On Shabbos, it's malacha. During the week, it's prohibited stam because mishum shenemar, it says lo yilbash gever simlat isha. A man should not wear the dress of a woman. And the sages tell us that is, based on the continuation of the pasuk, it says a woman should not have kli gever. Now, kli is a very general word like we saw last time. Even clothing is included in kelim. Kelim means implements. Sometimes it means a tool, like we said before in the Mishnah, a tool of cutting. And sometimes it means a musical instrument. Sometimes it means pots and pans and forks and knives. Sometimes it means furniture. Basically, the general rule of kli means anything of use. And that's why, because all our clothing is kelim, technically speaking, if it's made out of natural materials, it can be makabel tuma, which we discussed last year. But the point is that a woman should not wear what a man wears, and a man should not wear what a woman wears. I know nowadays this generation has a very hard problem with this very simple prohibition. Do Gentiles have such a prohibition? No, they may do so. Is it smart for them to do? Like the Rambam says, no, they should learn from us. Just because things mutter from them, they should look at us, the Kohanim of the world, and say, oh yeah, I should try to live up to Jewish standards. So this is prohibited. A man should not reduce his white hairs. Doesn't necessarily mean black hairs, by the way. It means the natural color. If he's a redhead, or she was a redhead, and she's starting to have white hair, she wants to remove the white hairs or dye it. So the halacha is that dyeing hair for men is prohibited because of lo yilbash, right? Correct?
Make a distinction. There are various levels you're talking about.
So first, removing the white hairs among the black hairs is prohibited. A man should not wear what a woman wears. It means you can't wear a dress. Okay, you can't carry around a purse. You should get yourself a briefcase or a wallet, okay, or a towel bag. But you have something that outwardly is what a woman wears, so you can't wear that. And that applies to all articles of clothing, whether from shoes to hats, correct? But then they say you shouldn't also adorn yourself like a woman. So it applies to what?
That particular, does that depend on the reasoning? Does it depend on the aspect? Does it depend on what people were doing in your environment?
So a lot of this is unclear because the Gemara doesn't say it. You have to look at the reasons the Rishonim give. Some Rishonim connect the prohibition to Avodah Zarah. Others connect it, like the Rambam says, explicitly more Nevuchim. Cross-dressing was an act that they used to do as part of their ancient rituals in the Avodah Zarah. And other times they say that cross-dressing is just a way for, get this, a way for perverts to ingratiate themselves with members of the opposite sex. So why would a man do this? So he could hang out with women with whom he shouldn't be hanging, or it's a way for him to have access to the women's room or the women's bathhouse. And we know that there are actually many types of perverts who have seized on this type of thing today and say that, oh, I'm a woman, you have a criminal, a guy who belongs in prison. So of course, prisoners should be kept separate, but what do they do in certain jurisdictions where they've gone completely nuts? They then say, you know what, we have a prison for women, which is already a really strange thing. We're going to take this man who has this tendency, this perversion, this fetish, and we're going to put him among the women. So he succeeded. That's what the Rambam says they were trying to do. So we do not have a tam written in the Torah. And because the tam is not written explicitly in the Torah, we cannot say that we know the reason, therefore, if the reason doesn't apply, perhaps we have a leniency. The sages were very machmir with this because they saw that there was something connected here. It's connected to chukos hagoyim, that's what they do. So whatever is the real reason why the Torah gave it to us, of which there could be many, we cannot decide what the reason is. So we have to just follow the halachas that the sages gave us. And one of the things they told us is we cannot wear their clothing, we cannot wear their tachshitim, right? The various things that they would wear. And they said, don't mess with your hair the way the women do. So I'll just give the cases that are explicit. What? You have a question about that?
They're all not on the same level.
They
Pulling out the hair
is like it. Mishum. It's mishum. It's not the same thing. You won't get lashed.
Let's say a person put on a dress, adopted for the reasons that you were just saying.
Yes.
He gets malchus?
If he was born not to cross dress, I believe, yes.
Okay. If he pulls out a white hair, does he get malchus?
Not necessarily. So I want to show you what the Rambam says about this.
Necessarily. It's a yes or no.
I don't think so. I don't think so. So
what I'm trying to get at is there are obviously the arisas here, and there are anhokos or isuri the rabban. You can't put them all in the same bag.
Yeah, correct.
That's all I'm trying to.
Hold on a second. I want to show this here. Here, let's see. I put this on the screen for everybody. I'll read you the halacha. Okay. Here it says here. It says Havara Seyar. He gives an example. Removing hair from the body. Oh, we're going to get to this example. Could go in base hashechi v'se erva. A person wants to shave his armpits or his pubic hair. Eino asur min Torah. So there's no prohibition for the Torah. Elami divrei sofrim. So that's the level of divrei sofrim. V'ama amivro makin makas mardus. V'mem devar marurim b'makom shein ma'avirin loso ela nashim. So in that case, they had to do it. Women try to remove all their body hair. Men should not do so. There's still prohibition. If all the men are shaving their armpits and removing, let's say, waxing their chests, if men are doing that, so we can't punish this man. Still prohibited by the sages. We just can't punish him.
Okay, so
what?
You're quoting Shulchan Aruch?
I'm quoting the Rambam. The Shulchan Aruch brings this also.
Who doesn't bring out the Amara?
Hold on. Umater lahavir se'ar shar avarim b'misprayim b'chol makom. You could still use the scissors to reduce your body hair. I wanted to get to the point that was the sages said that a person should not dye his hair because also that's here he says dyeing the hair that's prohibited loke. Okay, all it takes is to v'chein im tzavar se'ar shachor mishiyitzpa sara levana achas loke. Okay. And also says, here it says here, removing one hair, loke. Removing even one white hair, apparently that is the actual prohibition. I was wrong about that. Removing one hair is a prohibition, doraisa, one white hair. So a man can't dye his hair on his head. What about?
And that's doraisa.
Yeah, that's doraisa, like we just had here. But shaving the body hair, so that's a derabbanan.
Moshe Matters that.
Well.
Moshe Matters, how can you do it? It's a doraisa.
Maybe he held otherwise. This isn't the final word.
What is it, the Bible?
The Rambam. Rambam's not the final word. Okay. Rambam isn't just that. Usually that's what you could find. Clear things. There's more to say. Well, so you could ask. I was going to get to this. So let's get to the ones that we know, the first ones, and then extrapolate. So a man shouldn't dye his hair. What about dyeing his beard? The Gemara brings an example. It wants to know how hairs grow. Do hairs grow from the edge? They get longer, they're self-producing, or do they grow out of the follicle? They're growing up and out. So Gemara says they grow up and out because we see older men dye their white beards black, and eventually You see, the white is against the skin, the black is out. That means it's growing out. There are those who would allow dyeing the beard because if a woman, chas v'shalom, has facial hair, she doesn't dye it like she would her hair to look younger. She would try to remove it at all costs. And they go through painful means to remove hair for those who might have, waxing and the laser and everything like that. It's the worst thing in the world. But whereas a man should not dye his head hair, apparently dyeing the beard hair is totally fine because it's not a womanly thing to do. So too, we can understand this prohibition of removing the body hair. A man has body hair, and it's not the type of thing that offends him. Most men go through it their entire lives, and it means nothing. However, to totally shave it, we saw, the Rambam brings examples. You want to shave your armpits or your pubic hair, or even your chest hair, like a woman, so that's prohibited in all places. Sometimes we wouldn't punish you. But to trim such hair, like the Rambam says, is totally fine. He's still hairy. Person has so much hair, it's coming out of his collar, so he cuts it away, or whatever it is, just like trimming the beard. I saw someone wanted to give me a tshuva, well written, but still it was conflating the idea that there were some Hasidic Rebbes who felt that shaving the face with scissor action is prohibited because that is like what a woman would do. A woman wants to completely remove her facial hair. So even though we already have a prohibition to use a razor on our faces, perhaps using scissor action would be permissible, but don't say, no, even removing the entire beard with scissor action, while you're not going to be hit with the prohibition of using a razor, you're still doing something wrong in that you're removing your beard hair. But they wanted to conflate that with trimming the beard. I can understand the man completely removing the hair of his face or some other place in order to look fully smooth like a woman. That's a problem. But to take, a scissors and to leave his beard immaculate, exactly 2 inches below the chin and nice and shaped, like many of the Rabbanim do, that's not a womanly thing to do. That's just getting a haircut for your beard. So that would be allowed. So too, trimming the body hair wherever it may be, as long as he still remains hairy, would be allowed. So we have to be ready for these things. Another question, because I think we're going over time. Is there a question about that? No? Okay. But either way, it's a difficult thing. The Sridi Aish gave I think a heter for someone who had too young. He went gray too young, so he had a shame issue. So he allowed him perhaps to dye his beard because he's not trying to cross-dress, he's just trying to look normal. But the question is, at what point, it's a very fine line, where do you draw the line of saying, okay, this man is expected now to have some graying happening, so now he cannot dye his hair. If you, let's say, allow a 19-year-old man to dye his hair so he looks normal, at what point do you say, buddy, you're in your 40s now, you have to stop? It's a difficult thing. Also, the difficulty of the Sridi Aish's heter would be the Torah seems to hold, the way the sages have it is, a man may not dye his hair, period. And there's no exceptions. It's an Isser D'Oraisa. We can't say, well, because when the Torah says it's against cross-dressing, but if he's doing it for some other reason, it's not. That brings us to the thing we started with, Kavod HaBrios. This fellow's Kavod HaBrios, basically, his own personal feelings of his own dignity, perhaps are not strong enough to override what is essentially a blanket prohibition as understood by the sages, that a man should not dye his head hair. So I'm uncomfortable with that. Most people do not do it. For many men, it's a question, when does hair loss set in? When does losing the hair color set in?
I wouldn't mind checking the Shulchan Aruch to see whether he has the same level of Isur by dyeing the hair.
Okay, you want me to do it right now?
No, next time.
Okay.
Because based on what you're saying about the Sridi Aish and Rabosha, it's difficult to understand how they can be not to such a thing.
Okay, so we'll if you want, we can look at it next time.
Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
What about a toupee?
So what about a toupee? Oh, yeah, sorry, we didn't get to that. Women, what's a man's toupee? Man just trying to cover up his baldness. He's not trying to make himself look pretty like a woman. If a woman gets a sheitel, so it's usually long, right? Like the kinds you see in the advertisements in, I think, Mishpach or whatever it is. So you'll have that. But a man's toupee is certainly not the type of thing a woman wears, right? So, it's like a shirt. Certain shirts are women's shirts and certain shirts are men's shirts. So you could entertain the idea of a toupee. We'll say about that. Okay, fine. We'll see more sources, God willing, I guess on Sunday. Be good, everybody. Shabbos.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.